I don't believe men were created to be pawns in someone else's game. I believe we were created to be steward kings. Men under authority, yes, but entrusted with real responsibility. Not perfect men, but disciplined ones. Men who rule themselves, serve God directly, and refuse to live in fear. This is king, not pawn. Guys, there's this version of Christianity that looks holy on the outside, but feels super heavy on the inside. Okay, it's rule focused, it's behavior obsessed, it's always measuring and always correcting, and it's always watching, but not in the good way. Okay, it talks constantly about what you can't do and rarely about who you're becoming, what you're becoming. And a lot of men grow up thinking that this is faith. I know I did, and I've learned that it's not. Okay, it's legalism. Now I want to go ahead and break down what legalism really is, because legalism is not obedience. Legalism is simply obedience without relationship. It is following rules without understanding the heart behind them. It's compliance driven by fear, not alignment driven by love. And scripture is brutally clear about where that leads. Jesus was relentless with the Pharisees, okay? And often he saved his harshest words not for the sinners, but for the religious legalists. Okay, try saying that 5 times fast. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you clean the outside of the cup and plate, but inside they are filled of greed and self-indulgence. Matthew 23:5. See, they followed the rules perfectly, and yet they missed God completely. Why? Because rules became a substitute for real transformation. And that's because rules often have a certain sense of safety about them. And I want to go ahead and break down why legalism feels safe, okay? Because it appeals to men for one simple reason. It removes responsibility. Because you say to yourself, if I follow the rules, I don't have to grow in discernment. If I obey blindly, I don't have to wrestle with God. If I do what I'm told, I don't have to own the outcomes. And that posture, it feels humble, but it's not. Okay? It's spiritual immaturity. Slaves obey. Sons understand. Scripture makes this distinction explicit. For you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received the spirit of adoption as sons. Romans 8:15. Slaves, they simply obey commands. Sons, they understand the mission at hand. Slaves fear punishment. They don't want it. Sons, they accept correction. 2 different postures. A slave will resent the authority over him, and a son learns how to grow under it because he understands why it's important. Legalism is going to trap men in slavery even while they're talking about God. And you've probably seen this before. There's probably a man in your life who outwardly has done everything right. He's checked all the boxes, he's avoided all the sins, and yet he's angry. You might even say he's cynical, judgmental, quietly resentful. And that's because obedience without intimacy, it eventually feels like an exploitation. And resentment is always a sign that something is misaligned. Legalism, it produces performers, not disciples. And here's what it actually creates. Legalism will create rule enforcers, moral accountants, status hierarchies, just a fear-based conformity. It does not produce wisdom, does not produce courage or discernment, and it certainly doesn't produce love. And that's why legalistic communities collapse the moment rules stop working. Jesus, he broke these rules constantly. But, and this is a big but, Jesus didn't break God's law. He broke man-made interpretations that missed the heart of God. Big difference there, right? He healed on the Sabbath. He ate with sinners. He was touching the unclean. Why? Because love is what fulfilled the law. Okay? Rules without love, they distort God. So I'm going to go ahead and give you guys a political parallel here because I believe that it really does matter. Here's how this connects to our exact moment in time that we're in. Because legalism didn't stay in the church, okay? It moved into politics. Today, people don't really think in terms of truth. They think in terms of sides and teams. You must believe all the approved positions. You say all the approved phrases, hate the approved enemies. And if you don't, you're simply cast out. You become a social outcast. And that's not conviction, okay? That is ideological legalism. And even the church today fell for this. Many churches, they don't discipline men. They simply program compliance. Don't question, don't complicate, don't disrupt. Just agree, just repeat, just stay in line. Ultimately, that's not Christ-like. That's actually pharisaical, right? Have you ever noticed when you ask certain questions, the rooms just get uncomfortable? You're not asking sinful questions, or you're not hearing somebody ask a sinful question. You're hearing honest questions. And instead of engagement, you get warnings. Be careful. Don't overthink. Just trust the system. Trust the process. That's not faith protecting truth. That is fear protecting power. See, legalism, it will always turn political. Legalism needs enforcement. Enforcement requires authority. So eventually rules become weapons, disagreement becomes heresy, people become expendable. This is why both religious and political movements turn cruel when they lose humility. Here's what Jesus actually invited men to do. Okay, Jesus did not just say, follow these rules and you'll be righteous. He said, follow me. He focused on relationship first, transformation second. And when you follow those two things in those order, guess what happens? Obedience flows naturally. See, when Christ is central, obedience becomes alignment, not fear. Okay? Sons, they need discernment, not scripts. God is not raising robots. He is raising sons who can think, discern, judge righteously, and act responsibly. Okay? That requires intimacy with Him, not constant supervision. And this is why legalism, it can't possibly handle this complexity, because legalism demands simple answers. Yes or no, us or them, right or wrong. But really, reality and obedience are often complex. That's why sons must mature and slaves, cling to rules. The shift that must happen is this. You need to go from tell me what I'm allowed to do to teach me how to walk with God. From which side am I on to what is Christ like here? From, hey, I followed the rules to, did this actually produce good fruit in my life and in the world? So how do we as men change this? Okay, well, we change this by refusing blind obedience, refusing tribal hatred, and refusing shallow faith. And instead, we choose relationship over rules, discernment over slogans, fruit over appearances, okay? Because that is how sons grow. Legalism creates slaves. Christ creates sons. Slaves obey because they're afraid, and sons obey because they understand. Do not trade relationship for rules. Do not trade discernment for sides. And do not trade Christ for control. This is king, not pawn. You are not called to be a compliant religious subject. Okay, you were called to be a son, walking with God, thinking clearly, and bearing good fruit in a confused world. And it is time that we start living like it.